Welcome to the show Gold Squadron Gays. It's the podcast where two Star Wars loving gays talk about and review their favorite Star Wars content while also being gay as hell. I'm your host, Bradley Brower.
I'm your other host, Charles Rogers, and welcome to the show that is literally recording during D23's opening presentation. So you will occasionally hear me clicking in the background to refresh my
it's happening right
X feed. I think it's happening right now.
Oh shit. Because
Let me
I went
see
through
if I
work
can-
all day and I didn't really hear any news or anything, so I was like, oh, I guess it's
It started today. The opening celebration is happening now, or it is happening very, very, very soon.
Oh, I guess I keep thinking it's late at night because obviously I'm East Coast, so I'm thinking like, oh, that's late for you guys to start a convention main stage presentation thing, but whatever. Okay, and it's really not. It's like
It's
prime
really
time.
not. It's like 6:30 on
perfect for you
on a
guys.
Friday.
Yeah, that's
Oh,
perfect.
it's
for you
beautiful
guys.
over here. You would think after years of trying to arrange things with online friends, all across the country, and also 3 years of doing this podcast, 3.5 years of doing this podcast, I'd have gotten used to everybody being in different time zones. But no, it's still difficult to wrap my head around sometimes. Anyway, I'm mostly just hoping for them to drop some announcement literally right in the middle of us recording, because I don't know if I'm going to have a lot to really substantially talk about with this episode.
I mean, it's an episode, I guess. Yeah.
It is a very good episode. I'll say this: it is a very good part of the overall meta plot of the back 5 episodes of this show.
Yes, I agree.
That is about basically, not to spoil where I'm at with the episode.
I was like, we're jumping to the
But-
certain things, but yeah.
If this were a book, this would be a random chapter in the middle of it. We can really only talk about it in the broader context of the whole, which is fine. That's how the show is being written, but that's definitely going to color my opinion of especially this episode. Anyway, you want to take us into this episode?
This week, we're talking about The Bad Batch Season 3, Episode 14, Flash Strike. Odds are against the Batch as they operate behind enemy line. Charles, what's one thing you liked about this episode and one thing you did not?
One thing I liked about this episode was Rampart. He continues to be the best thing about these back 3 episodes. I
Yes.
love him. He's hilarious. One thing I disliked about this episode, I mean, it is kind of hard to say because this is sort of the ultimate maneuvering people into place episode. This episode, I hate to say it, doesn't have a lot of identity by itself. A lot of this episode is concerned with setting up the finale, maneuvering the Batch into position to assault Tantus, moving Rampart from the Batch to Imperial custody, moving Omega into position where she can try to escape, moving Emery and Echo into the same room so they can do their little alliance. It's hard to look at the narrative arc of this episode and find something that didn't work for me, because the narrative arc of this episode is we got to get people in place for the finale. That's it. And so that's honestly, that's going to be my answer to that question. It's not going to be a direct answer to the question, but because anything I could say about this episode is addressed by the fact that it's setting up the finale. So why does Omega spend multiple shots crawling through ventilation while it's setting up the finale? Why do we spend a bunch of time walking in the woods? Because we're setting up for the finale. Anyway, what about you, Bradley? One thing you liked and one thing you did not.
One thing I liked about this episode was I do enjoy it when the characters are all starting to finally come together and finally get to the point. It's kind of I wouldn't say it's a thing I liked about the episode. I would say it's more a thing that I thought was okay about the episode. I don't really, like you said, I don't really like anything in particular in this episode because there's nothing super great about it, but it's also not bad. I don't think this is a bad episode by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm with you on that. It doesn't have its own identity. You could never watch this episode on its own and then just not watch another episode. It's a literal continuation of last week's episode and a prequel to next week's episode. So it's really it can't stand on its own. But one thing I didn't like about this episode was probably the jumping back and forth between the different groups. I just thought we needed to consolidate the groups a little bit more. I get the Batch is its own group, Omega's its own group, but then Echo kind of comes off the Batch and does his own thing, but then he had to incorporate Emery into his thing, and it was just everybody was too spread out. I genuinely, I'm let's just kind of shrink this a little bit. I'm glad they didn't separate. I think there was a scene where they fall out of the crashing shuttle and they separate for a second and then like almost immediately they're back together. I was worried that they were going to try to do this whole like Wrecker and Crosshair by themselves and Hunter and Rampart by themselves. And I would have been like, oof, let's not split up the group anymore. Thankfully, they came together pretty quickly, but I don't know. I don't even think I needed Echo to do his stuff either. Like his stuff was interesting, but I don't, other than like him connecting with Emery, there's no purpose of him being on his own. I just think that maybe they could have done that a little later in the episode, maybe. I don't know, and kept him with them or something. I think his like sneaking around stuff just was like too much. Like didn't really need it. Like or same thing with Omega doing I get what like why we need to see her crawling up the tubes and stuff like that, but it's like I think it's like a solid minute of the episode is just her walking around in the air ducts or whatever.
You know what I think it is about this episode? This episode is all set up all the time.
I think that's what it is.
If you look at the concept of setups and payoffs, which we've talked about in regard to this season, because this season has paid off some of what it set up, the show set up in the first 2 seasons, and it also has internal setups and payoffs. We talked about how a whole lot of episode 1 was set up and a whole lot of episode 3 was payoff. This is another episode where it just feels like we are setting up, and we're going to start to get payoff. But we haven't quite gotten to any of that payoff yet by the end of the episode. And comparing it with season 3, episode 1, Confined, that episode had its own narrative arc internally within that episode. That Omega went through that episode and she got to a different position. She confronted something. She grew as a character. Emery also changed as a character, and then the episode ended. And it was all just kind of showing us stuff we would need for episode 3, but it was its own story. This one feels like it's as I mentioned a couple of times before, one chapter in a longer story that doesn't quite stand up on its own. Honestly,
I think so.
Maybe this should have been rolled up into the finale.
I think honestly, you could have split this episode in half. And like there's things that they could have done in last week's episode. I get it, like the drama of like, oh no, are they gonna make it to Tantus on the shuttle at the last second is a really good stinger to the end of whatever.
Oh no, that episode was great. The ending of that episode.
That was fantastic.
Was
However, them crashing into the jungle could have easily just been the end of that episode. Like we could have known, you know what I mean? Like we know that they're gonna make it to Tantus. So I feel like that they could have done that. Don't get me wrong. I love the drama. I think that was a really good.
You love the drama. The reality TV producer loves the drama.
I'm telling you, I thought it was good. However, if you had incorporated them crashing into Tantus as the end cap of that episode, it would have saved you a hell of time. And then this next episode, honestly, you could have folded it into the finale and it would have been way better because you would have been setting up her escaping, but paying it off in the same episode. It wouldn't have been like you could have had her scouting in the beginning of the episode. That could have been literally the opening of this episode is her scouting, like because the alarms are going off because someone crashed on the thing or whatever, right? So
you can even still have all the stuff with the kids because that's the important bit.
Right.
Omega's probably got one of the stronger story beats in this.
Yeah.
Because it's that continual reversal of her now being in the position that the Batch was in season 1, where you have these kids who don't quite know what they're doing, and she's in a position where she has to trust them and also take care of them. So you can also still do that. You can do that. Yeah, but I get what you're saying. I think I was having a conversation earlier today with someone, and I sort of pointed out that I think broadly a lot of my structural issues with a lot of the Disney Plus shows has been Disney Plus. That the problem is not the stories themselves. Ahsoka. The problem that I had was not the story itself. The story itself made complete sense to me. The problem I had was how it had to be structured for the Disney Plus streaming format and the way that it had to be broken down. The Acolyte, same thing. I just did an episode of Jedi Guys and Jedi where I talked about the Acolyte. And one of the things that I talked about on that was because the creators of the episode were mandated to a specific amount of episodes. And they were also told like there's 2 episodes of the Acolyte, which are day and night, that were supposed to be 1 episode. And you can tell they're supposed to be 1 episode. And they got split in the middle. So the back half of that episode, Night, fucking rocked. marks. Some of the best Star Wars I've seen with my eyeballs. Day suffers immensely because of that. And it's not a problem with the story. It's not a problem with the writing. It is entirely a problem with how Disney Plus is forcing them to structure things. And I can feel the executive meddling in the third season of The Bad Batch. I can feel it in the bones of this, how this show is laid out episode to episode, what they chose to focus on, what had to be left on the cutting room floor. I sense it. I sense the disturbance in the force that is them having to lean into this streaming format that this show was not conceptualized to be in. It was not designed this way. From its outset, it's designed like a episodic network TV show. And for the Disney Plus format, it struggles to work on that. And I think it's most evident in this truncated third season, where they really needed one more episode and they really needed to reorganize some of the stuff so that it would be a little bit more overarchingly satisfying. We will talk about how it does stick the landing on some of the characters, in my opinion, at least the main characters, in the finale episode. But for now, we do actually have to talk about this episode.
Yeah, we should probably get into it.
we should probably get into the episode. I know I don't have a lot of notes for this one, but we should probably talk about it.
Section 1. We begin with the Bad Batch traveling through hyperspace on the ship attached to the science vessel. Echo is on board the science vessel copying data from a computer and hiding from the crew, and at Tantus Base, Hemlock learns from Scorch that Clone Force 99 infiltrated the science vessel and fled on a stolen shuttle. He orders starfighters to monitor the area. As the clones descend into the planet, they detach their shuttle and are pursued by starfighters. The shuttle is hit by laser cannons. At the Tantus Vault, Omega and the other children hear the laser cannon fire, and Omega realizes that her brothers have found her.
I see you bracing. I literally saw in the Zoom call, because we use the video for visual cues, I saw Bradley finish that and brace, like set and brace in the call, because he knows what my first note about this episode is going to be, which is that the Kiners are unbelievably popping off with this soundtrack.
I wanted to say, I was going to try to say it at the same time as you but I feel like, we would have to say it in unison of like, the Kiners music is popping off. Like, I don't know. There's got to be like a sound bite.
We might see if we can do it for the finale.
Yeah, right.
Insert Charles praises the Kiners music here.
Yeah, every time.
I just love their music so much. I also love the upside down shot that we get where the shuttle is attached to the bottom and you can see someone walking around in the cockpit upside down. Every time they play with space like that visually in Star Wars, I think that's awesome.
It's also, I love like the science of it. I know that it's like, obviously like there's some kind of gravity thing happening on the ship, right? To keep them all from floating and going upside down and doing whatever. But I do love when they do like upside down views, like, because it's, well, what we perceive to be upside down, because obviously there is no upside down in space, but somehow the ships seem to be right side up going towards the planets and things like that, the nature. But
yeah, I think it's into the fact that it's space fantasy and not really science fiction, that the ships are meant to represent actual ships. Or like, in terms of the military, these ships are represent like an actual navy, and you only think of an actual navy fighting on the oceans with like a horizontal,
right,
on a horizontal plane. The Timothy Zahn books are the only books that I've read for Star Wars that have really addressed the fact that space is 3 dimensions and you can do a bunch of stuff with it. Also, kind of the Return of the Jedi movie. Kind of. There's some business in the Return of the Jedi movie. One day we will just get super bored and cover the original trilogy. But there's this whole thing to where the Emperor's moving the fleet, the Imperial fleet, around the Sanctuary Moon at Endor, but he moves them to the far side of the planet in order to get them to deceive the rebels to think that they're not there. And then later on in the battle, there's a moment where they have to consider the fact that the Death Star has an operational super laser. And so the rebels decide to basically like fucking rush the actual Imperial fleet, because then the Death Star can't target them if they're in the middle of the Star Destroyers. Anyway, there's a surprising amount of tactics that goes on in Return of the Jedi, and one day we will cover that movie.
There you go.
And I will talk about the Battle of Endor and everything that is happening in that battle. Anyway, I don't know if you could tell this from my long discussion about the Battle of Endor from Return of the Jedi, but I love me a good fighter fight.
Okay.
Fighter fight. It made sense in my notes when I wrote I
Okay.
love a good fighter fight, but then I said it out loud and it sounds fucking stupid.
Well, we can't say it too much because then it'll sound worse if we keep saying it. So,
See, you say that, Bradley, but the thing is, you're not on social media and you're not in the same Discord servers I am. You get to mercifully, when you finish recording these episodes, you get to turn off your computer and go live your life. I guarantee you, the fact that you've just said we have to stop saying fight or fight means that multiple people are going to tag me in the phrase fight or fight the day this episode comes out.
I love that.
For me, you love that for me. You love that you don't have to deal with that.
Right?
No, I love the fighters being up there and chasing them around, and then they get the turbo lasers involved. One thing I do like about this episode is I do like how we're starting to get the idea that things are affecting each other. So like the turbo lasers fire, and because the turbo lasers fire, that alerts Omega that the batch is there.
Right.
And so Omega can be like, okay, now I'm going to do a slightly riskier plan that I wouldn't have done if the batch weren't literally outside.
Right. She's now that she's kind of given like almost like a signal, like, okay, you can start your plan now. Like it's okay to start.
Yep, which she does. Speaking of the scene with Omega's plan, I want to read my next note verbatim. Dr. Skalder, can you calm down for like 10 seconds? Because Emery's like, you stay here and keep an eye on the children, which is a perfectly reasonable order.
Yeah, I think she just doesn't like Emery. Like, because
I think she fucking hates Emery.
it has nothing to do with like, oh, I care about children or like whatever that Skalder is making it out to be, like, oh, you're too soft, like you care about these kids or whatever. No, they're genuinely a part of the experiment or the thing that Hemlock is doing. They're valuable assets that need to be protected, right? They can't be quote unquote damaged in any way. They need them for their blood, so they have to be kept alive and healthy, and they're live specimen. It's not
She literally
unreasonable.
calls them specimens.
Right.
That's her thing. She stops Emery to be like, no, they're specimens.
Right. It's like, yeah, but that's important. Like, even if she didn't call them children and she was, even if Emery had just been like, protect the specimens or whatever, like, she still probably would have been pissy, like, because
Skalder would have found something to say, because
Right.
she clearly wants Emery's job. Like, she doesn't
Yeah.
think Emery's doing a good job. She wants Emery's job.
It's that imperial jealousy rearing its ugly little head all the time.
Because this system from the outset is designed to pit people against each other. That is how these systems work, which is how you end up with an inner circle around the Emperor of a bunch of fucking yes men. And the people at the top of the Imperial hierarchy after Tarkin gets taken out all suck and are bad at this, because this is literally a system that encourages people to backstab each other and promotes the absolute worst kind of people. And if you're wondering why every single strongman dictator seems to be surrounded by a bunch of incompetent yes men, this is how that happens. This is how that ends up happening.
Section 2. Hunter sets the damaged shuttle on autopilot, and the group, along with Rampart, descend into the jungle using cables. When Rampart's cable malfunctions, Hunter cuts it, causing Rampart to fall. However, Hunter catches him in midair, and they both detach from the shuttle just before it crashes. Hemlock sends patrols to the crash site. Scorch informs him that the science vessel is approaching, so Hemlock orders it to be searched upon arrival. On the ship, Echo disguises himself as a stormtrooper. As the vessel enters the hangar, the ship prepares to unload their cargo, and Scorch and a group of stormtroopers arrive to search the ship. In the jungle, Crosshair and Wrecker meet up with Hunter and Rampart. They hide as a patrol gunship flies overhead, and the Imperials order a search of the surrounding jungle.
I like how this season opened with a shuttle crash on Tantus, and now sort of the beginning of the end of this penultimate episode is a shuttle crashing on Tantus.
I guess I never thought about that, but yeah, that's actually kind of interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, it's thematic parallels, which is also why I think this should have been part of the finale.
Yeah.
Because
I'm getting that.
the finale could have started with the shuttle crashing, and then we could have gotten an hour and a half of glorious sieging Tantus. But this had to be its own episode. But I did think that was very cool that it started with one and ended with one. Okay, we need to talk about the scene where Hunter physically reaches out and yanks Rampart down while he screams.
I thought that
Because
was
that's the
so funny.
funniest scene.
It's also hilarious because it's probably the most true in character Rampart's ever been in the show because something about when a person is falling to their death, like they no longer put on a facade, right? Like Rampart seems very facade, like he likes to put on this kind of, I know I'm important, I know I'm not afraid, I'm no, whatever, right? Because he's an Imperial, that's just how they are. But the second he's put in actual physical danger to where he is falling to his literal death from the sky, he immediately it's just gone. His demeanor, his scream is so funny because it's so flamboyant in the way that it's like he can't control himself. It's hilarious. I love it.
No, he's a coward. He's always been a
Yes.
coward. He's always hidden behind his rank and hidden behind his soldiers and hidden behind his position. And when faced with an actual mission that he's never been on, he was perfectly comfortable sending clones into these situations.
Right.
And being like, oh, you'll be fine. What are you on about? The second he's in this situation himself, now it's screaming and clinging to the rope and having to be physically dragged out of the crashing shuttle because he's too scared to actually jump. I love him. He has been such an entertaining villain in this show. Like, he's very sinister, but he's also very funny. And here's one of my things, right, that people forget about Star Wars, especially dumbasses who are like, well, I want Star Wars to be dark and gritty all the time. I'm like, you guys know Star Wars can be funny, right? We can have humor in
You're
there.
allowed to have goofy, weird shit in Star Wars. Like,
You're allowed to have little jokes in there. Now, don't take it too far. But you are allowed to have your funny moments because it's for kids and kids like to laugh.
Right.
And adults like to laugh too, actually. Laughing is not the province of children specifically.
I was gonna say, I think that's what makes Bad Batch good is that if you had only the dark moments which it does have a lot, don't get me wrong. I mean, Bad Batch definitely has moments where it is, oof, we just murdered people. Oof, we just shot people. Oof, we just did all this like adult things. When you inject a little bit of levity into this show, I think that's where it meets, like that's where it gets like its high points because you can't be dark and gritty all the time. I love Andor. I love how serious Andor is, but that's a different kind of show for a different kind of audience, right? This is like if you took Andor and you gave it some levity, like that's kind of what this show is. And so I love that.
Well, even Andor had its silly little moments. Like there were moments in Diego Luna's performance, and there were moments that were kind of funny. Like none of them were laugh out loud funny like this.
Right. It's
But
more
even
of like
that
a
had
chuckle,
a little bit
like,
of
yeah,
levity.
yeah.
Like you get a little chuckle out of it.
Yeah.
I really push back on the notion of people who kind of want to turn Star Wars into Warhammer 40K. Because I'm like, it can't be this grim, humorless, you're down in the mud and everything is just terrible, yada, yada, yada. I'm like, certainly there's a place for those kinds of stories here, but the whole thing can't be that.
Right.
Like, anyway, so the point is, I love Rampart. He's great, and I love him being stuck in this situation he's completely unqualified for, but has been putting people in for the past, for 2 seasons, or a season and a half until he got his ass canned.
Yeah, I think if they had not brought him back for this season, I don't think he would have been as interesting of a character because
No.
I think the first season, I'm not saying that he wasn't developed as a character in the first season, but there's something about like his arc is very quick in that show or in that first season because it's very much like, he's the villain, then he gets blamed for everything, by the second season. So I think that was a great little arc if that was just his arc. But the fact that they brought him back makes his character way more complex, way better, honestly, because now we get to see these different sides to him. Like what happens when the villain, is turned on, essentially. Like what happens when this system that held him up turns on him, puts him in jail. Now it's like he's nobody. The Empire doesn't care about him. The Imperials don't care about him. And now he's being put in these situations where he's dealing with the after effects of that and just being like, well, shit, like the Empire sucks. Like, and now I'm being ruined.
Well, that's the question is he going to learn empathy and is he going to learn that the Empire sucks? That's the question we're going to answer next episode. Is he going to figure this out? Or is he going to get himself blown up like a
Who
dumbass?
knows? Who
Who
knows what's
knows?
gonna
We'll
happen?
find out next
We'll find
week.
out with all of you when we watch it for the first
Very first time
time
next week.
next week. Yep.
I definitely have not spent a lot of time thinking about that
Uh,
particular scene from the finale and how funny I think it is. Speaking of scenes that are not funny, I did also find it really interesting that Crosshair sort of explains that he didn't want to come back here, but he's doing it for Omega because Omega didn't leave him behind. And so now we see almost the full culmination of Crosshair's character arc in this episode. And part of it is right here, where he's like, I'm going back for Omega. Old Crosshair would never have fucking gone back for anybody. This was a man who was well and full prepared to just shoot somebody on his squad if they were becoming a liability to the mission. He has said multiple times over the season, he's like, y'all should leave me behind or somebody else needs to be left behind. Like, if you can't keep up, too fucking bad. This goes all the way back to the Clone Wars, to his episodes in the Clone Wars, where he's been like this. And now he has learned the value of loyalty and he is breaking into the most single traumatizing place for him in the galaxy, because this is the place where it is very heavily implied he was tortured and attempted to be brainwashed. Not even heavily implied. It is just explicitly stated they attempted to brainwash him here. He's going back for Omega, which I think is cool. I also think Rampart's little, I heard that, is also very funny.
Section 3. On the science vessel, Echo, disguised as a stormtrooper, is nearly discovered by a protocol droid. He shoots the droid and steals its hand. He then exits the ship through the astromech droid chute and blends in with the other stormtroopers. Meanwhile, Omega notices that the droids haven't taken their vitals. Omega decides to scout in the dumbwaiter system, instructing the other children to cover for her if she doesn't return in time. In the jungle, Rampart becomes frustrated with following Crosshair's orders. On the base, Echo uses his cybernetic arm to access a network terminal and locate the vault, while Omega continues to navigate the system. The Batch and Rampart avoid a stormtrooper patrol and approach a large rock face. Rampart inadvertently disturbs a large Dryax beast while resting against it, causing the group to retreat as the creature chases them. As they flee, Rampart becomes separated from the group and encounters a stormtrooper patrol.
So, that droid that Echo runs across, that is not AP5, but it is voiced by the same person who voiced AP5,
Oh.
the best character in Rebels.
Yes.
That is Steven Stanton. We have heard him before in this season. But if you don't remember who Steven Stanton is, he is one of the all-stars of Star Wars voice acting. He is the voice of Wilf Tarkin in basically everything animated. He is the voice of Masameda in basically everything animated. He is the voice of older Obi-Wan Kenobi in basically everything animated. He is Griff Halloran in Resistance. And he is also the voice of Admiral Raddus in Rogue One.
Oh, nice.
So, fucking love this guy. He's great. He is reprising his role as this type of Imperial droid, although, again, this is not fan favorite AP5 from Star Wars Rebels, unfortunately.
I love this droid, only because it reminds me of him, obviously.
Yes.
And this is my favorite type of Imperial droid because, like, first of all, I love the fact that it's just a C-3PO body with a different head. I mean, that's literally like one of my favorite things about it is just like they were like, how can we make this evil looking? Let's give him like a bug looking head. I love it.
Well, I think that droid, let me check. This is the thing Charles didn't research before we started this episode. But I think this droid might appear
Another time
in a Star Wars.
Oh, I mean,
in the actual movie. Let me see if it appears in an actual film.
I've seen it. I've definitely seen it live action before. I just don't know where I've seen it.
Yes, it appears in Star Wars Episode 4: A New Hope is its first appearance.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah,
so it appeared all the way back in the original film.
Cool. I think they should do more of them, honestly. Although I guess
think
really
they're great. The logistics droids are fantastic.
I guess the only place it could show up realistically would be Andor, but I don't know. Oh, well, that's not true because, it's not like they go extinct after the Empire goes away. So I guess theoretically they could just be repurposed and reused in other ways, just like everything else in the galaxy. So
the fucking New Republic would be all in on that shit.
I was going to say they probably
You know, they would
run the
be
New
all
Republic
in on
system.
that shit.
Yeah.
Yeah, they would just reprogram them because that's what the
You're
New
right.
Republic fucking does. Is it takes all the Imperial stuff and it gives it a fresh coat of paint and it goes, no, see, we're the good guys now, even though we're
Yes.
using all of the old Imperial tech and using all of the Imperial's old people. Ugh, Christ, that episode of Mandalorian season 3. We don't have time to get back into that and relitigate that. I'm just going to read my next note again verbatim. Quote, always need a good hand joke,
Uh,
end quote. It's an unspoken rule that if you can make a hand joke, you make the hand joke.
right. Can I also say too, I love how in this universe, I love that any droid hand just so happens to fit on top of Echo's weird little screwdriver hand. And it just like he can like unhook it and like hook it in perfectly, like it has the same mount joint or some kind of thing.
How
Like
is it working? We don't know. We
I
don't
don't
care.
know, but you know what? It doesn't matter because now he has a nice disguised hand. Because before, when he was holding his gun, it was so awkward because like he kind of like he doesn't rest it on his little screwdriver, but like he kind of like awkwardly holds it like weird because he can't support the bottom of the gun with his other hand because he obviously doesn't have one. I just find that really funny that he has to like awkwardly hold it. But there you go.
Yeah, it's one thing I wish we'd have seen Echo more in this season. And that's one thing too with it is because it is like it's kind of silly for him to balance the gun on there and like but also like this is a legitimate problem. Like he needs to find the droid hand. Like he needs to find a hand so he blends in.
Right, because if you just walked around without a hand,
If he's
people would be
walking
like,
around
"What
with
the
that one,
fuck?"
that's a
Yeah,
problem. They don't really dwell on this or the challenges that this presents at all with him
he just
having to
solves
fit
that
in.
problem very
It
quickly.
just solves it, and then you're like, oh yeah, that kind of was a problem. Okay.
Yeah.
I love the scene with Omega and the kids because it's interesting. You look at the scene and you're like, why is Omega putting so much faith in these kids? And I think it's two reasons. Number one, she has no choice.
Yeah.
This is what she has to work with. But number two, the batch put a lot of faith in her, and she knows what kids are capable of. And we will see in this later on in this episode that the kids do successfully manage to delay Scalder for long enough for Omega to get back.
Right.
So I thought it's a really interesting reversal of how far Omega has come. And we've talked about this through last episode. And we talked about it this episode to where she's now the older kid, which I think I really like these aspects of this episode. Moving on. I also love the conversation between Crosshair and Rampart because I think this is kind of the other half of the apex of Crosshair's character development. When they talk about Rampart's like, oh, you used to believe that good soldiers followed orders, to which Crosshair replies, depends on who's giving them.
Yeah.
And also Rampart like can't wrap his head around the idea that Crosshair's had character development. Because he's like, oh, you're like me, you're just out for yourself. I'm like, girl, we just had 14 episodes about how that is not the case. Were you watching? Were you watching the show, Rampart? So Rampart continues the streak of sucking shit at this by awakening the like forest creature that attacks them.
Yeah, the giant beast thing that the whole entire point of being on Tantus, they had to train fucking dogs to like prevent the fucking beast from attacking them. But yes, they come across one.
Yes, they come across one, and Rampart wakes it up, even though it should be pretty obvious that's what it is. Like, how do you miss the camouflage on that?
That's the other thing I didn't like about this. I will say, here's another thing I didn't randomly like about this episode, and this is a nitpick. Why doesn't Hunter sense that it's there? Because like that's
Because
his
Hunter's
powers,
Hunter's senses are like the Force. It works when the writers remember he has it.
Because like okay, I'm just being nitpicky just for fun, just because we just need silly things to talk about. But like theoretically, if I was writing this, I would literally they'd be walking, and then Rampart would be talking, and then he'd be being annoying, and then Hunter would be like, "Shut up," and then he'd be like, "Keep talking," right? And he'd be like, "No, literally, shut up," and then they'd be like, "What is it?" And then he'd be like, something's wrong or whatever, like there's something happening, and then all of a sudden the beast would like come up out of nowhere behind Rampart and be like blah. I feel like you could have written it in there somehow that Hunter sensed it. I don't know why. It nitpicks me like a little bit, just that bothers me that he doesn't know that the beast is there until they're standing next to it.
Yeah, this has been one thing about Hunter's particular skill on the show is because it really does only exist when the writers remember he has it.
Right.
because sometimes they forget, or sometimes he gets distracted, I guess, because he's having this whole conversation. So, like, maybe it only works if he, like, focuses, but he's supposed to have these, like, incredibly heightened senses. Maybe they're dulling over time. You know what would have really dig into this? More episodes.
If only streaming
Maybe
were like
another
a great
season or two.
opportunity for writers to just write as many episodes they want, as long of episodes as they want. But unfortunately, that's not the case with streaming.
Unfortunately, no, because this is controlled by business people who are making business decisions, and the business numbers say that you can't do that. Fucking anyway, okay. They fight the thing, and Wrecker has to be nerfed for next episode, otherwise he would fix a lot of the plot of the
course.
finale. So we have to have him get whacked by the thing.
I feel like that happens every episode now. Like, I don't understand.
Wrecker's too strong.
Yeah,
That's
like
the thing about Wrecker is you kind of have to nerf him. It's the Worf effect. Are you familiar with the Worf effect?
I don't watch Star Trek like that.
Okay,
so-
I haven't actually watched Next Generation. We're
I've
not
never
to
seen
it yet. In Holodeck Divas, which is the Star Trek podcast that our friends over at Dark Side Divas do, that I'm following along with on my own Star Trek journey. But one thing I do know about the Next Generation is that it gave us something called the Worf effect. And the Worf effect, so there's this character named Worf, and he's supposed to be a really good warrior. But the writers are constantly having him get his ass kicked to establish that the big villain of the week is very serious. And so it became known as the Worf effect, where you have this character that's really strong, but their purpose in the plot seems to be to have the crap beaten out of them so that we can establish the threat as a big deal. That's what's kind of happened to Wrecker in the third season.
So now we're going to coin a new term for any rest of Star Wars things that we cover, and we're going to call it the Wrecker effect.
It's the Wrecker effect now for Star Wars.
Yeah, because I don't like Star Trek like that. So I feel like we're going to call
I'm
it
starting
the
to
Wrecker
like
effect.
Star Trek like that.
Well, section 4. In the vault, a medical droid and Dr. Skalder come to examine the children. They try to distract the doctor to give Omega more time to get back to the vault. Meanwhile, Omega navigates the dumbwaiter system and finds a Zillo Beast enclosure. Omega returns to her cell just in time for her blood draw, just as Skalder arrives. Meanwhile, Echo infiltrates the central lab and accesses a computer containing information about Omega. Emery confronts him, noticing his droid hand and recognizing him as Echo. Emery confirms that Omega is inside the vault, offering to help him reach her and free the children. She explains that Omega is not the only child imprisoned at the base. After Skalder finishes testing the children and leaves the vault, Omega tells the other children she has found something big and has a plan, asking for their help.
The trivia guide for this episode is so fucking funny.
Oh, really?
Because they had nothing.
Oh,
There
okay.
are 3 slides.
Okay, what?
And one of these slides is literally, hey, did you know that's the Zillo Beast?
Oh my God. Like, be for real.
I feel so bad for whoever was writing these slides, because there's some episodes it's like, oh, there's all this really cool and interesting stuff in this episode, and then this episode was like,
Zillo
did
Beast.
you guys know that was the Zillo Beast? Yeah, girl, we knew. We worked that out. This is a linear story. Thank you. We did piece together what the Zillo Beast was.
I was like, I think we've been watching since season 1, so I feel like even if I never saw Clone Wars,
I feel
think
like
I know
no
what
one
this
is dropping into this show in season 3.
Yeah, no,
I
I don't.
hate to
I don't.
say
This, unfortunately, yeah, this was not a. Let me start watching The Bad Batch here. Like, I don't think so.
No,
I
nobody's
just
doing
don't-
that.
No.
Nobody's doing that. It's so funny. I feel bad for them. But also, that's so funny that that's one of the ones they had to go with. The kid's annoying Skalder is genuinely very funny, too.
I love the Ella, like, so I love how they had to like it keeps getting gradually more annoying to her because they start with like, I think what is it? She goes,
I'm
"Oh, I'm hungry."
hungry.
Yeah, she starts with "I'm hungry," right? And she's like, "It'll pass."
It'll pass.
And then that doesn't work. So then she goes to the next kid. She's like, "I don't feel good." Like,
Skalder's like, oh my god, these
Like,
fucking
shit.
kids.
like I gotta fucking test her, like do all these extra tests. And then like as she gets to Jax, he's like, "Can I go next?" Like being really
She's
annoying.
like, oh my fucking god.
Fuck you kids. Like I hate children. I'm never having kids. It's so funny.
Oh my god. It's hilarious. And it works, is the thing. Like,
Right.
you feel like they're gonna flub this, but they don't. They delay her just long enough for Omega to get back into position. cut to Echo and Emery. There's, I think, other stuff in the middle, but my next note is Echo and Emery. And my one note here is the pairing of Echo and Emery to work together is one of the most interesting decisions this finale makes. Because Echo was the guy who was experimented on in a facility. And he is having to work to save these kids who are being experimented on in the facility with the scientist in charge of doing the experimenting. That is a great fucking pair up right there. They have a wonderful conversation about this.
Also, does Echo realize at this point she's a clone too, or no?
He knows. I think he
Oh, okay.
mentions that I think he mentions it.
Because I thought, yeah, I guess I was getting confused about some of the things they were saying. Because he said that like they weren't just there to rescue Omega. He's like, we're here to rescue all the clones. And then I think when he says that, I mean, if not, he already knows about Emery because obviously Omega probably told him, obviously. But I think he also knows like when he says all the clones, he means her too, right? So he's like, we're here to rescue all the clones. That includes you too. And I think she knows that on that level, like, oh, I don't think she realizes that she's also being held captive in a sense. Like she can't escape.
I think she does. I think the idea of escaping has not occurred to her.
Right. That she is like she has the ability to now escape. She can leave.
Yeah,
like,
she can
you're
leave.
allowed to
She
leave.
can
Yeah.
go. If the kids can get out because that's who she's there keeping an eye on, then there's no reason for her to stay either.
Right. Because that's all she
in
really cares
freeing
about.
the children, can make her own exit from this system that is so toxic to her. My final note is that God bless Omega. She's having way too much fucking fun with this plan that she's concocted in her head to free the Zillo Beast.
I think the second she saw the Zilbeast, she goes, "Oh, now there's a plan."
Now there's an Omega plan. I can work with that. She has got the most. If for some reason you're listening to these episodes and you haven't watched the episode itself, she has the most shit-eating grin on her face when she gets back. Because she's like, oh, I know where this is going. And that's the episode.
There it is. I mean,
There it is.
It just kind of ends, but you know, it's because we already know, like, okay, finale, like, is next. Like, so let's move on. Like, let's get to the finale, you know?
Let's go. It's a great cliffhanger, too. Like, we've set up the finale. Here's my final thoughts. We've set up the finale, and now we're just going to go into the finale.
Right.
And the finale is going to be non-stop
Mm-hmm.
the whole time. This episode was a moving people into place episode and a setup episode, and it was pretty good. What about you, Bradley? Do you have any final thoughts?
Yeah, it's just like, it really does end with, are you ready for the finale? Because it's not going to stop once it starts. Like, here we go.
Nope.
Like, this is it. So I'm glad they did that, only because if you didn't have this episode, then you would have to spend the first half of the finale setting up a lot of this stuff and like her finding the Zillo Beast and blah, 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 blah. You know, like it would be a lot. I think you could still do a lot of this stuff like without, you know, having this episode. I do kind of struggle with it because like I feel like a moving into place episode is necessary, but I also feel like we could have just had a slightly longer finale and then just called it a day and then built out an episode. I genuinely feel if we made some of the cuts we've talked about of some of the structuring of this season, if you could truncate a couple of these episodes into each other, we could have gotten some real good, like solid B story episodes that helped flush out the series, not just the meta plot, right, of this season. Like we could have gotten a little bit more Sid, we could have gotten a little bit more Rex, like we could have, you know, there's other things I think that they just left out that they could have just shrunk a few of these episodes and it really would have, or made them more concise, I should say. It would have made it a little bit better. But that being said, this episode did do its job because now next week we can just go into it.
Cool. And what are we covering next week, Bradley?
I still have my old notes from last week, so it says Flash Strike is next week.
This episode was shit.
Oh,
I'm
yeah,
a
you were,
hack
yeah.
I'm a hack and a fraud. I'm a hack and a fraud.
Wait a minute. You
Hold on. This episode was directed by Nathaniel Villanueva, and it was written by Matt Micknovitz. There we go.
Now this is where you ask me what.
Now, Bradley. Again, I'm a hack and a fraud. What are we covering next week on the Hack and a Fraud show?
Next week we're covering episode 15. The cavalry has arrived.
Pluggables. Bradley works in reality TV, which you should know because I made a joke about it earlier. We promote one show at a time for him, although you can watch a bunch of the shows he's worked on Peacock and Bravo. Right now, we're still doing The Circle Season 6 on Netflix. But then there's something else coming this fall, right? Something else is airing? Please?
Maybe. I don't know. It might be a summer show. I don't know.
I will fucking kill you if I have to keep plugging The Circle for another year, Bradley.
You know what? It is what it is.
No, you know what? I'm going to go find another one of your shows. I'm going to find one that we haven't promoted yet and just start promoting that one. We've promoted Queen's Court. We've promoted Temptation Island.
I think what I'll do is I'll make you a script. You know, for now on, we need to make a pluggable script because I feel like if I just list all my I'll list my last 3 shows as like the, you know, like the script for my show.
There we go. And then, like, give me the last 3 and I'll start doing them on the pluggables. Bradley, what were the last 3 shows you worked on?
Let's see. Married to Medicine season 10.
Yes.
The Circle season 6, and then before that was
Queen's Court, right?
No, I think Temptation Island came out after Queen's Court. Maybe, okay. I don't know, honestly. Whatever. Anyway,
Bradley has a resume. That's the point of this. And you can watch his shows so that he keeps getting work, so that he can be paid, so that he can make this podcast. You can also find me as a cast member on the Star Wars TTRPG podcast For Light and Dice. I also write gay thriller mystery novels. You can find those on Amazon and Amazon Kindle Unlimited. They're called Beach House Studios. I don't know how to do my own fucking plugs this week.
Yeah, I think we'll write a script from now on.
We'll figure out a script.
We'll figure it out.
Most weeks me doing this off the cuff works decently well, but this week my brain has just decided to shut down. I think it's because it senses that as we began speaking, the D23 opening, the intro started, and according to X, which I have just been sneakily sort of checking, we got like 0.5 seconds of Andor in the opening visual reel, and I think the existence of that in the universe fried my brain.
There you go.
That's what I'm going with. That's what I'm going with as the excuse. Anyway, if there's D23 announcements, we will talk about them next week. For now, we're going to run the socials. Thank you for listening to this episode of Gold Squadron Gaze. Did Charles fuck something up? Email us at goldsquadrongaze@gmail.com to let us know. You can also find us on Twitter at @GoldSquadGaze, and you can find us on TikTok and Instagram at @GoldSquadronGaze. You can also find us on YouTube at our Gold Squadron Gaze YouTube channel, where we post full episodes of this show. Finally, if you liked the show, don't forget to rate us and give us a review on your favorite podcast platform. That allows other people to find our show. As always, thank you for listening to Gold Squadron Gaze, and we'll see you next week. God damn. The 3rd season of Star Trek, the original series, is what happens when your creative team just does not care and is doing a fuckload of cocaine. And not like good cocaine. Not like fun cocaine. Like really bad quality cocaine that might have something mixed in on it because you're a fucking NBC producer and you got that shit for cheap. You dumb motherfuckers. Most of you are probably dead now. But I'm still mad about this season of Star Trek, the original series.